since this is the country of Stephen Hawking, I still remember his book, A Brief History of Time. And I remember I read this back in the day after I graduated MIT, and I remember here was a guy that was supposed to be, probably was, one of the smartest guys in the world. Actually, was just at Westminster Abbey the other day, and I walked over his name.
Yeah, right.
And yet here he was explaining something in a real simplistic way about this beginning of time and this Big Bang theory. What do you think about when you think of him, of the original theory, and then when people ask you all these questions like, what happened before that? What happened after that?
Yeah.
How do you start on this?
Yeah, well, Stephen Hawking was an incredible mind and obviously an incredible situation to be able to go out to the stars, but yet in other ways being unable to explore the way many of us commonly do. So he's a great inspiration. And his book, I also read it when it came out. I think it was in the late 80s, if I'm remembering correctly. And it was this wonderful exposition in accessible language of ideas that I was working on at the time. So it was sort of great to see this attempt to reach out to the wider world. And, I hope that I'm following in some sense in that tradition, because the goal of this book and my other books is to excite people about these ideas and begin to address the kinds of questions that you turn to. I mean, the number of times people say to me, what did happen before the Big Bang? It is the natural question to ask. And one of the answers that I give is inspired by, I believe it was Stephen Hawking who first gave this wonderful little analogy where he said, look, if you are talking about the very beginning of time, and if that is what the Big Bang was, there may not even be a notion of time before. And he said, look, imagine you're walking on planet Earth and you pass by someone and you say, how do I go further north? They point you northward. You continue to walk, you pass by someone else, point me northward, they do. When you get to the North Pole and say to the person there, how do I go further north? They look at you kind of funny and say, you can't go further north than the North Pole. This is where north begins. That analogy may apply to time. You can go back 100 years, 1 billion years, 10 billion years, but when you get to the Big Bang, maybe you can't go further back in time. Maybe it makes no sense. Maybe it's just like trying to go further north than the North Pole.
I think there's an analogy with maybe growing up in a world of Newtonian physics and then trying to understand quantum physics, or understanding this whole time-space continuum where time and space are related, and at first you're like, oh, how does that work?
Right.
So I guess we're thinking of, I got an hour to get home time, and you're talking about the crucial definition of time. And maybe there was no time before that, which makes our kind of caveman brain hurt.
That's right. And I like to say, look, our brain evolved to survive. And it became well-equipped at thinking about the world in terms that aided that survival. But the truth of how the world works and the things that you need to have in your brain in order to survive, that's two different things. And therefore, what we have in mind and our intuitions may not be aligned with the true nature of the world. And that's why it takes dedicated study and exploration to break through these intuitions instilled over 100,000 generations or more and catch a glimpse of the real nature of the world. And Einstein, of course, was the genius at this. He would take the things that everybody took for granted and wipe them away, rethink them, resulting in time that elapses at different rates if we're in relative motion, space and time that can warp and curve, and in fact meld into each other, creating what you described, the space-time continuum, showing that there's a deep connection between these two ideas that at first sight seem different.
But because of our size and our upbringings, that's just a normally foreign thing for us.
Of course. Look, if we routinely traveled near the speed of light, then you wouldn't have needed an Einstein. Right. We would understand that time slows because we would experience it all the time. We would understand that space becomes blended into time because that's what would happen in our experience. If we were born really tiny, like 10 to the minus 10 meters across, you wouldn't need the quantum mechanics revolution because we would experience quantum mechanics. It would be as second nature as Newtonian physics, right? If I take something, I don't have an object, but if I threw an object at you, I'm quite certain you'd know where to put your hand to catch it. And that would not require you do any Newtonian calculation. Your brain is a Newtonian computer that without any calculation knows the trajectory of objects because that was useful in the ancestral environment. If we were tiny, we would have needed to know the quantum trajectories. We don't know them.
So I'd be catching it on
You'd be going
both
all over the
areas,
place.
right?
That's right. Two
Right.
places at once
At
kind of
once,
thing.
with
Yeah.
my hands
Right.
that are in two places at once. Okay, that's an interesting way.
Yeah.
So we just grew up knowing this one reality.
Yeah.
So we have to study really hard and have a specialist part of our population and a bunch of guys in Switzerland with high-speed particles
Exactly.
to understand this other thing. And yet that also is a part of our reality, our origins, and somehow maybe our purpose and consciousness. And
It's all blended together. And my suspicion is that if we get really good at virtual reality or augmented reality, whatever it is, maybe we can, from an early age, have kids experience the world at high speed or experience the world on very small scales, and maybe instill in at least some of these kids that kind of quantum or relativistic intuition from the get-go. And what would those kids, as scientists, then accomplish if they don't have to take the leap to understand Einstein and Bohr? Rather, they feel it the way they feel Isaac Newton, and they can then jump off from there. Wow, maybe they'll go some crazy place that we mere Newtonian-brained people who have to think hard about quantum mechanics won't be able to go.